In a Ford Model T, you can depend on just about everything, except the weather. In a Ford Pinto, you can make your own weather. Pinto's price is so low you can afford a sunroof, air conditioning, a rear window defroster to make the weather inside your Pinto as dependable as your Pinto. The economical little Pinto. Base sticker price $24.42 excluding dealer prep, destination charges, title and taxes. At your local Ford dealer.
The Ford Pinto, a masterclass in automotive missteps. Welcome to the Car Professor, the channel where we dive into the fascinating world of cars, exploring the legends, the innovators, and, occasionally, the disasters that shaped automotive history. Today, we're tackling one of the most infamous vehicles ever to hit the road, the Ford Pinto. Marketed as an affordable, fuel-efficient compact car in the early 1970s, the Pinto quickly became a household name, but for all the wrong reasons. From its questionable engineering to its legendary safety scandals, the Pinto wasn't just a bad car, it was a cautionary tale in how not to build one. Join us as we break down the many reasons why the Pinto earned its reputation as one of the worst cars in history, peeling back the layers of poor design, corner cutting, and corporate greed that turned this compact dream into an automotive nightmare. Let's get under the hood and dissect the disaster that was the Ford Pinto. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth looks at the best and worst cars of all time. This is the Car Professor. 1. Explosive fuel tank design. The Pinto's fuel tank placement wasn't just a bad idea, it was a tragic lesson in how not to engineer a vehicle. Located directly behind the rear axle, the tank had virtually no protection from the force of a collision. Worse, the filler neck was prone to detaching in an impact, spraying fuel like a gasoline sprinkler. Combine this with sharp bolts that punctured the tank like a set of medieval torture devices, and you had a recipe for disaster. In crash tests, rear-end collisions as low as 20-30 mph resulted in catastrophic fuel leaks. Ford engineers even identified a fix, a plastic baffle costing $1 per car, but management decided that fixing it wasn't cost-effective. The result? A car whose motto might as well have been, "Drive me if you dare." 2. Cost-cutting over safety. Ford's internal cost-benefit analysis on the Pinto reads like the punchline to a macabre joke. The infamous memo calculated that settling lawsuits for fiery deaths and injuries would cost $49.5 million, while fixing the design would cost $137 million. Naturally, they chose the cheaper option. To save $11 per vehicle, less than the cost of a 1970s vinyl record, they essentially turned consumers into crash test dummies. This wasn't just a corporate decision, it was a masterstroke of cold-blooded capitalism, the kind of thinking that gave planned obsolescence a whole new meaning. 3. Poor build quality. The Pinto's construction quality was so bad it felt like a parody of automotive manufacturing. The metal panels were thinner than a soda can, resulting in a car that dented if you looked at it funny. The doors often didn't align properly, leading to leaks when it rained, while the paint faded or peeled off faster than Ford could roll new ones off the assembly line. Inside, the cabin wasn't just cheap, it was insulting. Plastic bits cracked under mild pressure, knobs fell off, and the upholstery felt like something you'd find stapled to a bus seat. The Pinto didn't age poorly because of time, it simply disintegrated under the weight of its own mediocrity. 4. Weak performance. Under the hood, the Pinto offered a series of engines that ranged from lethargic to laughable. The base 1.6L inline-4 engine wheezed out 54 horsepower, enough to make a bicycle seem competitive. Even the optional 2.0L engine, which produced a mighty 86 horsepower, struggled to move the car with any sense of urgency. The Pinto had a 0-60 mph time that could be timed with a sundial, often taking upwards of 14 to 16 seconds, depending on the trim. Passing on the highway required the patience of a saint and the foresight of a chess master to calculate whether there'd be enough road left before a head-on collision. The manual transmission added insult to injury, with clunky shifts and vague gear engagement. Meanwhile, the automatic was a buzzkill, sapping what little power the engine could muster. In short, the Pinto's performance was so weak it seemed as though Ford had designed the car specifically to annoy its drivers. 5. Limited safety features. Calling the Pinto unsafe is like calling lava warm, technically accurate, but wildly understated. Reinforced bumpers, crumple zones, or even proper crash padding were afterthoughts in a vehicle seemingly designed for natural selection on wheels. Its basic safety design could barely meet federal standards at the time, which were far less stringent than they are today. Side impact protection was almost non-existent, and the doors were so flimsy they often jammed in crashes, trapping occupants inside. A particularly grim feature when paired with the aforementioned fire risks. The lack of even basic engineering foresight led to scenarios where minor fender benders turned into major medical emergencies. Essentially, the Pinto was a coffin on wheels, rolling off assembly lines with a built-in excuse: drive at your own risk. Crash testing. The Ford Pinto was like watching a horror movie in slow motion. In controlled rear-end collisions at a mere 20-30 mph, the Pinto's fuel tank didn't just leak, it exploded with the enthusiasm of a Michael Bay film. Engineers documented these fiery failures, complete with damning visuals of test dummies engulfed in flames. Ford, in its infinite wisdom, decided to bury the results rather than fix the problem, essentially turning every Pinto on the road into a rolling experiment in spontaneous combustion. If safety was a race, the Pinto didn't just come in last. It never left the starting line. 7. Rust problems. The Pinto had a love affair with rust, and it was a relationship that blossomed far too quickly. Within just a couple of years, this so-called affordable compact would begin to look like a relic pulled from the bottom of a lake. Critical components, such as floorboards and suspension mounts, would rust away, creating structural issues that were both dangerous and embarrassing. By the time the rust reached the doors, you could almost hear the Pinto whisper, "Put me out of my misery." It wasn't just a car, it was an accelerated lesson in entropy. Owning a Pinto was an emotional roller coaster, especially when it came to starting the engine. On its best days, it sounded like a blender full of rocks. On its worst, it didn't sound at all. The engines, particularly the base 1.6L and the optional 2.0L, were plagued by overheating, oil leaks, and timing issues that made them prone to catastrophic failure. Maintenance wasn't just expensive, it was futile. You'd fix one issue, only to have another pop up, leaving owners to wonder if they were maintaining a car or an industrial-sized lemon. 9. Subpar brakes. The Pinto's braking system was so bad it should have come with a disclaimer: stopping not guaranteed. Early models relied on drum brakes, which provided about as much stopping power as a stiff breeze. Brake fade during repeated stops was a common complaint, and panic stops felt more like long, drawn-out prayers. Even after Ford upgraded to front disc brakes, the improvement was marginal at best. Combine poor braking with the Pinto's other flaws, and you had a car that wasn't just unsafe, it actively resisted survival. 10. Noise and vibration. Driving the Pinto was an immersive experience, for all the wrong reasons. The engine roared like it was staging a coup against the rest of the car, while every bump in the road turned the cabin into a percussion concert of loose screws and rattling plastic. Vibrations from the drivetrain made you feel like you were piloting a jackhammer on wheels. If you thought compact cars were supposed to be smooth and efficient, the Pinto was here to crush those expectations. The only quiet moment in a Pinto came when it broke down, which was, ironically, a relief. 11. Faulty transmission. The Pinto's transmissions, both manual and automatic, were mechanical disasters waiting to happen. The manual gearbox was a 3-speed design, with an optional 4-speed in later years, that often felt like it had been borrowed from a tractor. Synchronizers frequently failed, leading to grinding gears and difficulty shifting, especially into first and reverse. The linkage was poorly designed, prone to slack and misalignment, making gear changes a guessing game. Meanwhile, the optional 3-speed automatic transmission was notorious for slow response times and excessive slippage, further sapping the already weak power from the engine. Owners often found themselves in dangerous situations when trying to accelerate out of trouble, only to realize the transmission hadn't gotten the memo. 12. Limited cargo space. Mechanically speaking, the Pinto's design didn't just limit its cargo space, it actively sabotaged it. The rear suspension, with its rudimentary leaf spring setup, intruded into the trunk area, creating awkward wheel well humps that ate up valuable room. The rear seat backs, which were supposed to fold down for more space, often jammed due to flimsy hinges, making the feature useless. Worse, the hatchback models had poorly sealed rear windows, leading to leaks that could soak any cargo stored inside. The Pinto wasn't just impractical for carrying goods, it actively punished you for trying. 13. Unrefined suspension. The Pinto's suspension system was a relic of outdated engineering. Up front, it used a basic coil spring and strut setup that was neither durable nor effective at providing a smooth ride. The rear featured a rudimentary live axle with leaf springs, which might have been acceptable for a truck, but felt archaic in a passenger car. This setup resulted in excessive body roll during cornering and a rough, jittery ride on anything less than perfect pavement. Ford also failed to adequately tune the shocks, leading to a suspension that oscillated like a pogo stick over bumps. Over time, wear on the bushings and joints exacerbated these issues, making the car feel increasingly unstable as it aged. 14. Recalls after the fact. Mechanically, the Pinto's recalls were a haphazard patch job. When the infamous fuel tank issue could no longer be ignored, Ford introduced a set of fixes that included a plastic shield to protect the tank and longer filler necks to reduce the chance of detachment. However, these solutions did little to address the core design flaw: the tank's proximity to the rear bumper and the lack of structural reinforcement. Additionally, many cars were never properly retrofitted due to poor communication with owners and dealerships. Even after the recall, crash tests showed that the Pinto still posed a significant fire risk, underscoring the inadequacy of the mechanical remedies.
15. Weak resale value.
The Pinto's mechanical flaws directly contributed to its abysmal resale value. Potential buyers were scared off by well-documented issues like the fragile transmission, unreliable engines, and rust-prone bodywork. On top of that, the car's poorly designed drivetrain made any second-hand Pinto a gamble. Engine mounts often failed prematurely, leading to excessive vibration and noise. Differential leaks and worn axles were common in higher mileage models, making used Pintos a money pit for repairs. It wasn't just that people didn't want to buy them, it was that the cars themselves seemed to actively discourage resale with their endless mechanical headaches.
16. Plastic fuel tank components.
The Pinto's use of plastic components in the fuel tank system wasn't just a cost-saving measure, it was a ticking time bomb. The plastic filler necks, designed to connect the tank to the body, were notoriously fragile. Over time, they developed stress cracks, particularly under high temperatures or repeated vibrations. In collisions, these filler necks detached or shattered, allowing fuel to spill uncontrollably. Compounding the problem, the seals around the fuel tank were equally subpar, often failing to prevent vapor leaks, even under normal conditions. Mechanically, this setup created a perfect storm for catastrophic failure, as fuel vapor mixed with hot exhaust components or electrical sparks during a crash. 17. High ownership costs. Mechanically, the Pinto was a nightmare for long-term ownership. The car's engines, particularly the 1.6L and 2.0L inline fours, suffered from chronic issues like warped cylinder heads and blown head gaskets due to poor cooling system design. Radiators were undersized and prone to clogging, leading to frequent overheating. The suspension components, particularly the rear leaf springs, wore out prematurely, causing alignment issues and uneven tire wear. On top of this, the Pinto's braking system required frequent maintenance due to undersized drum brakes that couldn't handle prolonged use. Every mechanical system seemed to demand attention, turning the Pinto into a rolling repair bill. 18. Underpowered electrical systems. The Pinto's electrical system was a mechanical afterthought, struggling to meet the car's basic needs. The alternator was underpowered, barely generating enough current to keep the battery charged under normal conditions. When accessories like headlights, windshield wipers, and the heater were used simultaneously, voltage drops were common, causing dim lights and weak blower performance. The wiring harness itself was poorly routed, with inadequate insulation that made it prone to shorts and corrosion. Ignition components, such as the distributor and coil, frequently failed, resulting in misfires and hard starting. For a car that didn't excel in anything else, the Pinto even managed to be unreliable in delivering the basics of electricity. 19. Minimal innovation. The Pinto's lack of mechanical innovation was glaring, especially when compared to its rivals. While other manufacturers were introducing advanced features like independent rear suspension and fuel-efficient engines, the Pinto relied on a solid rear axle with leaf springs and carbureted engines that were decades behind the times. The drivetrain design was particularly outdated, with a 3-speed manual gearbox that lacked refinement or durability. The Pinto's carburetors were notoriously finicky, requiring constant tuning to avoid rough idling or stalling. Mechanically, the Pinto was a relic in a rapidly modernizing automotive landscape, failing to embrace advancements that could have significantly improved its reliability and performance. 20. Terrible reputation. Mechanically, the Pinto earned its bad reputation through repeated failures across nearly every system. The engine mounts were poorly designed, allowing excessive vibration that contributed to premature wear on other components like belts and hoses. The suspension bushings and ball joints deteriorated quickly, leading to noisy, unstable handling. Even the drivetrain was a weak point, with frequent reports of rear differential leaks and driveshaft imbalances. The Pinto's reputation wasn't just built on anecdotes. It was a direct result of its widespread mechanical failings. By the time Ford attempted to improve the design, the damage to its reputation, and the mechanics who had to fix it, was already done. 21. Competitor superiority. The Pinto's mechanical inferiority was even more glaring when compared to its competition. Rivals like the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla featured precision-engineered engines that delivered better fuel economy and reliability, thanks to innovations like overhead camshafts and more efficient carburetors. The Volkswagen Beetle, despite its age, offered a rugged simplicity with an air-cooled engine that was famously easy to maintain. In contrast, the Pinto's engines were prone to overheating and mechanical failure. The suspension systems of competitors also outclassed the Pinto, with independent designs that provided better handling and ride quality. Mechanically, the Pinto was outmatched in every category, making its failure in the market a foregone conclusion. 22. Uncomfortable ride. The Pinto's ride quality was a mechanical afterthought. The front suspension, a basic coil spring and strut setup, lacked proper damping, causing excessive bounce over bumps. The rear suspension's solid axle with leaf springs was even worse, transferring every imperfection in the road directly into the cabin. The seats, mounted on weak, poorly reinforced brackets, often wobbled and amplified the discomfort. Vibrations from the drivetrain were a constant nuisance, as engine mounts and transmission cross members failed to absorb the movement effectively. On long trips, the Pinto wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a physical endurance test that left drivers sore and passengers reconsidering their life choices. The Pinto's steering system was a mechanical liability, combining vague feedback with alarming durability issues. The recirculating ball steering box, a dated design even for its time, often developed excessive play, making the car feel disconnected from the road. Tie rod ends and idler arms were prone to premature wear, leading to inconsistent steering responses and alignment problems. On top of that, the lack of power steering in most models meant that maneuvering the Pinto at low speeds felt like arm day at the gym. Even with proper maintenance, the Pinto's steering left drivers questioning whether they were in control or just along for the ride. The Pinto's heating and ventilation system seemed designed to frustrate its occupants. Mechanically underpowered, the blower motor often failed to deliver adequate airflow, leaving passengers shivering in winter or sweating through mild weather. The heating core was prone to leaks, causing antifreeze to drip into the cabin and fill it with a sickly sweet odor. Ventilation controls were rudimentary and prone to failure, with knobs that broke easily and vents that barely directed air. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a feature so poorly executed that it turned seasonal weather into a recurring nightmare. Despite being marketed as a fuel-efficient compact car, the Pinto often underperformed in real-world conditions. The carbureted engines, particularly the larger 2.0L and 2.3L options, were inefficient due to outdated designs and poor tuning. Drivers frequently reported mileage well below the advertised figures, especially in city driving, where the Pinto's weight and underpowered drivetrain struggled. Compounding this, frequent mechanical issues like misfires, leaking fuel lines, and clogged carburetors made maintaining efficiency nearly impossible. In an era where fuel economy was a key selling point, the Pinto managed to disappoint on one of its most important promises. 26. Prone to engine fires. The Pinto's reputation for catching fire wasn't limited to its fuel tank issues. Under the hood, poorly routed wiring and leaking fuel lines created a perfect storm for engine fires. Electrical shorts were common due to inadequate insulation and wear on critical harnesses. Fuel lines were made from subpar materials that deteriorated quickly, leading to leaks in close proximity to the hot engine block and exhaust manifold. Even routine maintenance, like replacing spark plugs, could inadvertently cause problems if mechanics disturbed the fragile components. The Pinto wasn't just a fire hazard in rear-end collisions, it was a hazard waiting to ignite from within. The Pinto's seals and gaskets were notoriously unreliable, leading to a host of mechanical issues. Valve cover gaskets frequently leaked oil, creating a mess under the hood and increasing the risk of fire when oil dripped onto the exhaust manifold. The seals on the transmission and differential were equally problematic, often developing leaks that reduced fluid levels and accelerated wear on internal components. Weather seals around the doors and windows were also poorly designed, allowing water to seep into the cabin and contributing to rust issues. These failures weren't just inconvenient, they were costly, compounding the Pinto's already high maintenance demands. The Pinto's chassis was a structural embarrassment, designed with minimal reinforcement to keep costs low. The frame lacked torsional rigidity, which meant the car flexed excessively during cornering, reducing handling precision and stability. This weak foundation also amplified wear and tear on other components, such as suspension mounts and bushings, accelerating mechanical failure. In the event of a crash, the chassis provided little protection to occupants, crumpling in ways that often made the situation worse. The Pinto's structural integrity was so compromised that it felt less like a car and more like a tin can with wheels. The Pinto's door mechanisms were a study in how not to build a car. The internal linkages were prone to bending or breaking, often leaving owners with doors that wouldn't open or close properly. Locks frequently jammed, requiring costly repairs or creative solutions like climbing in through the passenger side. Worse, the doors themselves were thin and poorly constructed, providing almost no protection in a side impact collision. In some cases, the door frames warped over time, causing water leaks and drafts that further eroded the car's already minimal comfort. The Pinto's doors weren't just flimsy, they were actively untrustworthy. 30. Abysmal resale market. By the time Pinto owners tried to sell their cars, the resale market had already deemed the model a pariah. Mechanically, used Pintos were often riddled with issues, from rusted frames to failing engines, making them unattractive to buyers. Even dealerships were reluctant to accept Pintos as trade-ins, often offering laughably low values. The stigma surrounding the car, fueled by its fire hazard reputation, poor reliability, and countless mechanical failures, meant that even a mechanically sound Pinto struggled to find a new home. For most owners, the best option wasn't resale but surrendering the car to the scrapyard, where its parts had more value than the whole. The Ford Pinto wasn't just a car. It was a rolling case study in what happens when cost-cutting, poor engineering, and corporate negligence collide. Its fiery reputation, mechanical shortcomings, and lasting impact on automotive safety standards ensured its place in history. Not as an icon of innovation, but as a cautionary tale. At the Car Professor, we don't just look at cars, we examine what they teach us about design, engineering, and the human stories behind them. The Pinto's story is a stark reminder that shortcuts in quality and safety can have long-lasting consequences, both for consumers and manufacturers. Thank you for joining us in dissecting this infamous chapter in automotive history. If you enjoyed this breakdown, or if you've ever had a Pinto story of your own, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay tuned for more deep dives into the best, the worst, and the most fascinating cars of all time. This is The Car Professor, signing off. Until next time, drive safe.